and welcome back to Alignment with Rebecca, where we are playing in the sandbox of ideas. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the Golden Rule, which is something we all hear about on a regular basis. As a matter of fact, I think I had a friend the other day send me something about how we all have to follow the Golden Rule. And as a philosopher, I was like, maybe not all the time. And I thought it might be a good idea if we discussed it a little bit because it definitely kind of goes in with this idea of the need to be the observer and being really engaged in the process of life observation and communication. So I'm going to say some things about the Golden Rule today that might strike you the wrong way, and that's totally cool. It's not a problem. But hopefully you'll be able to see how we can use the Golden Rule under certain circumstances, but then allow our brain to take over under other circumstances. So the Golden Rule, we've all heard of it, is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And it seems like such an easy, fantastic rule to follow. And there's also something called the Silver Rule, which is do no harm, right? Do nothing to others that you wouldn't want done to yourself. And if we think on Google, for example, they incorporated don't be evil into their code of ethics. It's interesting to note that it's no longer in their code of ethics, and I don't think it's because they want to be an evil company, but rather it's very difficult to know what constitutes evil depending upon where you're at. For example, China. Let's think of China for a second. China controls their information and the information that the public receives for the Chinese citizen in a very tight-knit kind of way. So Google's an American company, and here in America, we kind of feel like information should be available for everybody with a lot of different exceptions on that particular rule. But are you doing no evil if you decide to go against China's wishes? That gets to be kind of complicated. So, do no evil is a great idea, but how do we define evil? And how does this idea of evil change individual to individual, culture to culture, spirituality to spirituality, and the list goes on and on. Now we get the Golden Rule and the Silver Rule actually goes back way, 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 way back. We have it first in the ancient East, especially think Confucius, right? Confucian philosophy. One of the things it really looks upon very seriously is this Golden Rule idea. And we also have it from the West. It came to us from the ancient Greeks, but it was really kind of solidified in the West through the New Testament. Now, the problem with the Golden Rule are there are some assumptions that is the basis for this rule that become problematic in practice. First of all, these rules feel universal, but they aren't. The rule may be universal, but how you function within the rule is very much culturally bound. And so we can't have a rule that says do unto others like you would have them do unto you and think that it's going to work very well on a universal point of view. And when we think about it, it makes sense. I mean, we have so many different values in this world, so many different ways at looking at things. So we may agree on the generalized idea behind something, but when it comes to getting into the specifics, that's where we get into troubles. And the other question is how do we interpret this idea of others? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. What others? And the reason I bring this up is because others themselves is a really, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess what I want to say is this idea of others is so generalized that when we get specific about it, we tend to change our mind. So others are not universal. We can say we have to treat everybody with kindness, but if you're part of one political group and the person you're dealing with is another political group, you might not feel that the same rules apply. So the idea of others become very problematic as well because we forget that not everybody shares our values, our same way of thinking. So although these rules, the golden rule and the silver rule, feel extremely universal, and they might be to some degree in the sense that they're universal rules, how they are articulated becomes where there's a lot of contention. And this is why we have a problem with concepts such as cosmopolitanism, this idea that we could be a global community, a global nation. This is why the United Nations, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more later in this podcast, but that's why the United Nations is pretty much a powerless organization. They can offer recommendations. They can put their weight behind certain things that they would prefer to see happen, but they are without power because the nations cannot get together and say, hey, we all agree on the same thing. And so we're able to make a rule that we could say is a lawful rule for everybody in the globe. So the problem with generalized rules such as the golden rule is they are so generalized that they forget to deal with the specifics of our differences as human beings. And that's really very, very key. There's another problem with the golden rule, and that is we present these rules, golden and silver, as being automatic rules. We know they're important. We know everybody agrees, so we don't even have to think about it when we apply it. Matter of fact, it should just lead us so organically that, we don't need to think about it. And thank God, because we have a lot to think about, right? We've got our to-do list. We've got to get our jobs done. We got our family. We got to go to the grocery store. There's a lot to think about in a single day. So it's often nice to have something that we can fall back onto without having to think too much about how to articulate, function, and use a rule such as the golden rule. But as we've talked about since I started this podcast, just falling back on reactions, even if it seems like a great rule to fall back on, will not always be successful. And it can't be successful because people are different. Even if we belong to the same nation, the same city, the same church, the same family, we are wonderfully connected human beings with our individual differences as well. And if we follow rules blindly, then we aren't respecting the individual differences. So let's look at this idea of do not kill. Great rule, right? We all like the do not kill rule. And it seems to be a very universal rule. You shouldn't kill another human being. That's really stupid, okay? But that's even a little bit too specific. Do not kill is generalized. So does this mean that we don't kill the spider that's in our house or the mosquito that is starting to bite us? And what about humans? Do we allow killing under the circumstances of self-defense, under the circumstances of war, capital punishment? Or what about honor killings? So all of these things are not only exceptions to the rules, but also cultural differences, right? There are many cultures and religions that won't even participate in war because of the rule, do not kill. That means there's no exceptions for them. Now, there are other cultures who go, hey, if my daughter shames my family by having sex outside of marriage or shows her ankles in public, that is a blemish on my honor. And as a result, I have a right to kill her. Even the Bible, there are many exceptions to the rule in the New Testament. We see people stoning other people, and they're all justified by these different type of rules. So do not kill, in general, is understood to be universal. But how we articulate that rule becomes very different depending upon the culture, the group, the spirituality, the economic standing, and so on and so forth. These all change, as well as this idea of who the other person is. I mean, for example, if we're talking about, well, There's some people we can give this blanketed exception, do unto others as we would do unto ourselves, but there's other people who don't count. For example, slaves, women, people with mental disorders, people with psychological disorders, people with physical disorders. If you're born in some countries and you are in a lower caste system, so you're considered part of the lower class, there is a very distinct difference about the rights you receive because you're in that caste system versus those people who are in a higher, more economic caste system. So all of these differences show up when we apply a rule like the Golden Rule. And I think one of the most incredible, really, really incredible historical examples of this has to do with Eleanor Roosevelt and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, you would think a document that gave all humans some very good fundamental rights and agreed upon by the whole entire world would be a total slam dunk. I mean, who wouldn't want some kind of document that says humans have these rights? It seems like such a great thing to do. And yet, Eleanor Roosevelt, between the years 1947 and 1948, when she was working on the Declaration of Human Rights with the United Nations General Assembly, she had a hard time. And one of the most difficult times was coming to terms about the language used in this document for countries that did not believe in individualism. And for her specifically, it was the Soviet government at the time. And they had a lot of problems with the individual idea because the Soviets were a collectivist nation, a collectivist culture. They believed that the rights of individuals were very much defined by the rights of the state. But under collectivist reasoning as well, there's a huge hierarchy of where people are in the power structures. So if you are in the higher power structure, you're just going to get more rights. If you're in the lower, you are subordinate to those who are higher. And unlike here in the United States, you can't, for example, go to your boss and say, that was an idiot thing to do. I mean, you just created such a massive chaos for me and everybody else on my team. Thank you very much. This is what I'm going to tell you you need to do and change. That would never happen in a collectivist society. You wouldn't be able, as a young person, to go up to your parent and say, I'm 9 years old now. My allowance should be bigger. No, 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 no. That's not going to happen in that particular culture because how those folks relate to each other, people who live and breathe and function and are raised in collectivist environments, they have very set rules. You're not going to go to the top dog and tell them that you've done something wrong. Matter of fact, you have to find some kind of underhanded, what Americans would consider, that is, underhanded or passive aggressive way in order to show your displeasure because you can't be direct. You can't directly go and talk to that person in that way and think that it's necessarily going to work out well. So Eleanor Roosevelt had a really hard time with the Soviet delegates because of this idea of I, me, individualism. And it took a long time for them to decide how this Declaration of Human Rights, this universal Declaration of Human Rights, might be accepted by the entire world. So that goes back to this whole idea of the Golden Rule. You cannot blanketly create any kind of rule and expect that that rule is going to apply to everyone. And I want to give you an example from my life where I had talked about this a lot in my college classes, especially when I was teaching ethics and bioethics. And I wanted to demonstrate the differences. So in my family, when you come through the door, even if I don't really know you that well, there's a really good chance you're going to get a hug and a warm welcome, kind of like the French, you kiss each cheek and you accept them into your home and you bring them to your hearth and you You bring them food and, this hospitality. And how my family viewed hospitality was very touchy-feely. And for the most part, it worked out just fine. But then I moved to Hawaii. And I was on a bus and I was sitting next to this really wonderful woman. We had a great conversation. We were going a long distance, so we were sitting next to each other for about 45 minutes. And everything went well until I touched her lightly on the shoulder because we were sharing a laugh from a joke. And that's when everything changed on a dime. Now, this woman who is about my age, she comes from a collectivist culture, and I wasn't thinking. I just imposed my sense of familiarity, of acceptance, of joy through the act of a touch on a human being that does not like to be touched. It may be personal, but it was probably also cultural because in many collectivist cultures, this act of touching, of hugging, this familiarity of just the light, even friendly touch, that's reserved for people in their closed circles. It's not reserved for the person that you get along with, that you're sitting next to on the bus. Yes, okay, maybe our thighs are going to touch because the seats are tight, but those kind of touches are unavoidable and it's understood. But the friendly touch, that actually takes some time. So it's important that we are really cognitive of the people we are talking to and how we apply these different kind of rules. So we need to understand that when everything is said and done, we have to look at the process of communication. We have to be engaged. And what's so interesting about communication is it's not a study, a practice, an act that belongs to this narrow category of communicating, this very narrow, this is the words I say, and because I'm not saying filler words, I'm being conscious of my communication. Uh-uh. It really is a discipline that goes across all disciplines. Absolutely every single discipline. Everything from the hard sciences to the soft sciences to interpersonal communications to cultural communications to verbal and nonverbal communications. It touches psychology, it touches sociology, it touches anthropology. It just is this very wide and what I want to say is incorporated study of how people interact with each other. And it is such a wide area of study that you can't look at it narrowly. So you have to engage fully in all the processes. Who are you talking to? What are your needs? What is the other person's needs? How can you treat them in such a way that honors their differences while also honoring the different things which bring us together as human beings? So the first thing you need to do is become the observer. You must become the observer. Read somebody's body language. Try to find out who that person is and be really conscious of their different ways of being and living. Next, ask before action. This is super important. There's oftentimes, I think, that we as humans get upset when I say to my friend, for example, I'm having a really bad day. I hurt. My fibromyalgia is really acting up. I also have a lot of fatigue. And our reaction would be, oh, I know what you mean. I know what it means to be tired. I know what it means to hurt. And when we do that, what we do is we take the conversation away from that other individual who is seeking some kind of comfort. And we're turning it all over to ourselves. And that's problematic. So instead of doing that, we have to say, hey, what do you need in this moment? And the speaker needs to be very clear about their needs as well. Listen, I'm having a really crappy day. I want to complain about it. Can you just listen and hold space for me while I do so without giving me advice or telling me what to do? Being clear about our intentions and our needs is part of the process of really consciously becoming the observer. You understand what you need from a very specific point of view. And you also understand from the other person's point of view what is needed from them. And if you're very conscious rather than just falling back on, oh, it's the golden rule, I know this person wants advice, don't do it. The more specific you can be about how you communicate, and the more honest and open, your heart open to grace, this idea that, hey, yes, I believe we can support each other, but let me be very specific of how I view support, is extremely helpful, not only to you, but to the other person. It draws the line. So the other person doesn't have to guess what you need. And then also, take the moment to really ask if it's okay to hug somebody, to touch somebody, to hold their hand. If you do that, you're going to save yourself a great deal of grief going down the road. And you're also going to save the other person from their feeling of possible discomfort. So, although the golden rule and the silver rule are great rules in general, they aren't unthinking rules. We can't just stop thinking when we apply them. We really have to be very specific to find out what somebody else's needs are, and at the same time, be very clear about our needs as well. So, today's meditation, we're going to think a little bit about the golden rule and under what circumstances it may work and what circumstances it may not work. We have Kevin MacLeod with us again, Elf Meditation. Again, I haven't been able to find any other pieces of meditation music I really like, but this will work. Please take a seat. You can sit on a chair, on a couch, maybe sitting up in your bed or an office chair, or you can lie down on the floor, on a bed. Just get yourself really comfortable. Comfortable in such a way that you can stay alert, but at the same time become very relaxed. If you are listening to this podcast while you are driving or using some kind of heavy equipment, now is a good time to cut it off and come back to it later. As always, let's start with our breath. As the observers and the understanding of the complexities of processes, we have to calm our bodies and our minds. Breathe in for a count of 5. Hold for a count of 1 or 2. And then I want you to exhale for a count of 6 or 7. When we elongate our exhales, we bring to life the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps with relaxing, digesting, using our energy in a very even way throughout our body. I learned yesterday that we have up to 40 different stressors every day. That's the average person. And of course, once we move from the universal to the specific, each of us will experience more or a few less. But when we take time to really breathe, to activate that diaphragm and our parasympathetic nervous system, we bring down the impact of those stressors pretty dramatically. It just takes 5 minutes. So focus on your breathing. All right. If you have any thoughts, concerns, lists going through your brain. Put them on a cloud and send them away. You can get back to them. They don't need to be sitting with you right now. I'm going to ask you a series of questions that relate back to this idea of the golden and the silver rule. Allow any images, sensations, or thoughts to come to you, and then simply send them away. Who am I in my community? Who am I in my community? What are the values that guide that understanding of your role? Next, are other people in my community just like me exactly? Allow any thought, sensation, image, or sound come to you without judgment, without controlling the answer. Am I exactly the same as everybody else in my community? Next, are the values exactly the same in this community? Do we all hold the exact same interpretation of values in this community? Allow any sensation, thoughts to come to you. No judgment. And the final question is, how can I be conscious and respectful of these differences? How can I be conscious and respectful of these differences that are found within my community? Now, I'm going to encourage you to let go of all those questions and all the answers. Send them out into the universe. And finish up by focusing on your breath again. What makes us so incredible is that we are all connected. We are made out of the same stuff. We all go to the bathroom. We all sleep, eat. But what makes us beautiful as well as our differences? how we articulate things differently, think through problems differently. It is a dance. It is a delicate process. How can you best contribute to that process without falling back on assumptions? That's what I leave you with today. That thought. Make it your intention today to see the sameness as well as the beautiful differences and avoid assumptions. Be conscious about how you communicate today. Tell others what your needs are and ask others what their needs are. This small clarification can help change your world. Now open your eyes gently and try to keep that feeling of deep relaxation as you look around. Observe how your body and mind functions together in a different way. And when you're ready, you can wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes, maybe your nose. Stretch. And try to maintain this sense of peace as you move throughout your day. I thank you all for joining me today. This has been Alignment with Rebecca, playing in the sandbox of ideas. Aloha, mahalo, and of course, namaste.